All right. Hi, everyone. So first of all, thank you for taking the time to be a part of this and think about all of these things all together as a group as we prepare for CLTC, and I would say as we prepare for anything that we're going to do with our BBYO teams. These concepts and ideas that we're going to talk about are really important. What we're going to spend the next, I would say, probably hour doing, and we're going to take a little bit of a break after that, but for the next hour or so, we're going to talk about programming excellence. And this is something, the idea, the premise of CLTC is that our teams are coming in to be trained on all of the things that it takes to be a chapter leader, and at its core, if we want to think about the success of a chapter, programming is so integral to that. So we're going to talk about programming excellence. Tied to that is the educational framework. So we're going to start for just a moment thinking about what is the educational framework, how do we all use it, what is its place in BBYO, okay? So the educational framework, just as a little bit of background, was created as a way for us to think about what is it that we're trying to have our teams achieve over their time in BBYO. And it's important to keep that in mind, over their time in BBYO. BBYO is like this long road that our teams are on. And over the course of those 4 or 5 years, on average, they're going to achieve a number of things, and they're going to think about a lot of different things. They're going to take a lot of trips. They're going to be trained on a number of different pieces. And so the idea is, we sat down and said, by the end of that time, what are the things that we want them to be thinking about, doing, questioning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the premise here is the idea that they're not going to achieve everything at once. They're not going to learn everything that's encompassed in the educational framework at CLTC. It's an amazing 12 days for them, and they're going to learn so much. And the point is, we don't want them to learn everything in 12 days. We want them to be set up to continue that learning over the course of their time in BBYO. We also recognize that just because they graduate at 18 and they leave BBYO doesn't mean that, boom, a flip is switched and they know everything. The premise of being Jewish and being an engaged Jew means that you constantly are learning, and you're always evolving, and you're questioning things, and you're figuring things out about yourself. So again, what we're trying to do is get them to a place when they graduate from BBYO so that they're set up to continue on that path. We want them to have an understanding of themselves. We want them to feel comfortable asking themselves questions and continuing their learning and feeling a part of something. So that's the idea behind the educational framework without getting into sort of the nitty-gritty of it. So I want to start with going back to this idea of program excellence in BBYO. Does anyone know offhand what BBYO's vision or mission statement is? Great. So we're going to break that down a little bit, the idea of more Jewish teams and more meaningful Jewish experiences. So on the one hand, we want to provide programming that it's going to achieve a few things. On the one hand, we want it to be more experiences. We want them to be able to feel like they have a whole plate full of things that they can be a part of, and they're all going to be different, and they're all going to hit on different things. So we need diversity in our programming. Okay? We also want them to be meaningful experiences. This is where the excellence comes in. Okay? And we're going to talk a little bit later about the idea of, programs that are fun are fantastic. Programs that are fluff, maybe there's more we can do with it. And there's a distinction there. So we're going to talk about that. That's the meaningful part. We want them engaged, we want them learning, we want them taking something away. Then there's the Jewish part. And this is also an important piece. They're not just more meaningful experiences. They're more meaningful Jewish experiences. And so what it's our job to do is make them think about, what does it mean that BBYO is a Jewish organization? They could go to camp, they could go to a youth group, and they could be surrounded by a ton of people. What's the difference about BBYO? What is it that makes it Jewish? And why is that a special and important piece? Okay, so those are some of the things that we're going to look at. And the beautiful part about it is that it's right there in the mission statement. So, everyone take a look at the educational framework, which you all have a copy of. Everybody get one? Great, fantastic. So, as I said before, BBYO is by no means the end of the road for these teams. CLTC's completion isn't the end of the road for these teens. It's the beginning, it's a part of the process. So the way that I like to think about the educational framework is that it's this journey from me to we. So what does that mean when we go from me to we? If you take a look at the three big headings, identify, connect, and improve. Let's start with identify. Can someone just read for us the bullet points of identify? Great, yeah, thanks, Randy.
Identify, strengthen Jewish identity. Teens feel confident questioning and integrating into one life Jewish principles about God and Torah, history, traditions, and culture. Teens respect diversity within the Jewish community and in the world, and teens use leadership skills to help others develop their own Jewish pride, connections, and commitment.
Fantastic. So the way that I understand this is that it's all about figuring yourself out. And again, it's not about having all the answers, but if nothing else, being able to ask the questions. What do these things mean to me? How do I understand myself as a Jew? How do things that are happening in the world resonate with me because I'm Jewish? It's very much about the individual, it's very personal, and it's a lot of questions that you want to ask yourself. What do these things mean for my Jewish identity? Again, there's no one answer. Hopefully every single person that we come into contact with will have their own answer. And again, more importantly, when we talk about this is a part of the journey, our goal is not, as I said, for CLTC to end and them to say, I know what my Jewish identity is. If nothing else, it's for them to say, I feel comfortable continuing to figure out what my Jewish identity is. This is a process. Okay? So then we move on to the next one, which is connect. Who wants to read connect for us?
Teens have caring and respectful relationships with Jewish peers. Teens understand the role that Israel plays for the Jewish people around the world. And teens promote the inclusion of all Jews into a pluralistic Jewish community.
Fantastic. So where the first one was all about me, this one seems to be about recognizing that there are other people around me who are most likely thinking about themselves in the same way that I'm thinking about myself. And so how do we come together? How do we create a community? How do we form respectful relationships? And the other thing that I like to think about with Connect is, how do I recognize that I may have some things in common with Tracy? Fantastic. That's going to be a connector and we're going to have a great relationship because of it. And I may have some things that I see differently than Tracy. And how does that continue to strengthen our relationship? It's not just about the things that we have the same, it's also about the things that we see differently. How do we use both to form a respectful and strong community? There are advantages to having people be similar and advantages to having people be different. Okay? So now we've moved from the I into starting to form a group. Now we get to improve. Who can read improve for us? Great. Yes.
Understand, I am the old one, so
That's
understand current social issues, use Jewish values to guide involvement in service, philanthropy, and advocacy, use leadership skills to globalize peers and social issues.
Fantastic. So now we get to the idea, we've formed a community. We understand how we can come together and what things we can come together on. And now it's about thinking, what do we do with that? How do we turn things into action? How do we recognize we have abilities, we can be leaders? What do I still need to learn about being a leader so that I can turn this into something positive and make the world a better place? So again, this whole journey that our teens are on, where they start as an individual just figuring themselves out, and by the end, they have a sense of who they are, and now they is different. They is a large group of people, and they is that group of people thinking about, I want to do something active, proactive, and positive in the world based on this community. Okay? So any questions about anything that's come up? Great. And you can, if you have a question at any point, ask. So I want to also talk about a couple things that the educational framework is not. And this is where a lot of people sort of get stuck on, what am I supposed to do with this? This is a great document, and now what? So I have a few, the educational framework is not statements that I like to use. The educational framework is not a document that you want your teens to memorize. The educational framework is not a document they're going to be tested on. The educational framework is not necessarily even something they have to continue to go back to over and over and over. And the reason that I say that is because take a look at this. And I think you guys potentially are a great example as the coordinators. This is not written as something that teams are going to look to and say, yeah, oh, I want to go back to this every day. It's not. That's not the purpose of this document. The purpose of this document is for us to think about what are the things we want to do in our programs so that at the end of the day, we know our teens might be thinking about all of the things in it. Okay, and that's a really important piece. A lot of people say, well, I need to make sure that these phrases appear in my program. Absolutely not. That is not what the educational framework is. Okay? So I would add one other thing, really to think about when you work with your teens. Again, these are the things we want them to think about as they program. And CLTC is a really great place for them to start doing that. One of the best things that we can achieve is to know that all of the teens, the hundreds of teens that are going to go through CLTC here and at Bethany, are going to, by the end of the summer, come out saying, when I do a program, I want to say to myself, are any of these things going to be impacted by the program? Fantastic. That sort of is our end goal. Okay? All right. So the more important question then is, if this is not a document we want them to memorize and really be sort of poring over all day long as they're programming, how do we use it with teens when we're programming? There are a lot of different ways that you can introduce it. I have one example that I'm going to take you through, and we can definitely talk about others. But I think that the important thing, as I said when I explained it, I kept saying, here's how I understand the educational framework. And that's a really important piece. Each of you is going to understand it and relate to it a little differently. And hopefully that means the teens will understand it and relate to it in their own way. It's sort of the idea of identify. We all have our own pieces to it. So what we're going to do is a short activity that, as I said, is an example you could do how to introduce this idea to teens. You can also feel free to come up with your own. So what you'll see at the back of the room are 3 pieces of flip chart paper. Each one of them is labeled with a different outcome from the educational framework. So what we're going to do is go through them. You'll notice that one of them says identify, strengthen Jewish identity. So that's sort of the tagline for that first outcome. And what we're going to do is walk around the room, think about also the bullet points that are on that outcome, so the sub-outcomes that go along with it. And as you get to each flip chart paper, say to yourself, what does this mean to me? What are some questions that I would raise when I think about identify, strengthen Jewish identity? What comes up? So I'm going to do that for identify. Then I'm going to go over and I'm going to go to connect, and I'm going to say, create Jewish community. What are questions that I have that relate to the idea of creating Jewish community? How might that work? What might that look like? Again, we're not talking about programs. We're just talking about me as an individual. What does this look like? Okay? So as I said, all 3 are up there. You can use pens. If you have a marker that might show up a little bit better, that's totally fine. We're going to stop the video for a moment while you're doing that. And so take a few minutes, circle to each one of the 3, and write some thoughts. What do these ideas mean to you, and what questions do they raise? Cool? Fantastic.